Welcome back to Lionhead Legacy, a retrospective series on the games of Lionhead Studios and its founder, Peter Molyneux. This time we're looking back at a sequel that was following in the footsteps of a game that garnered a massive amount of acclaim and hype in Black and White. Now, a quick catch-up for those that didn't catch that video on that game, but Peter Molyneux is considered one of, if not the father of God games with Populous, and Black and White took that to another level with 3D graphics, pretty advanced for its time pet simulator component, and a flurry of different miracles to perform with a full campaign, skirmish mode, and multiplayer. Even if I and many others retrospectively recognize its flaws, Black and White is still a one-of-a-kind game that people wanted more of, and they would get its sequel 4 years later. The aptly titled Black and White 2 was released in 2005 to a warm reception. So why is it whenever I hear anyone talk about it, it's with disappointment? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and I'm gonna give you the full story and why I think Black and White 2 is not just a really good game, but is actually Peter Molyneux's last great God game. A quick note before we get started, I do want to give credit where credit's due in that while Peter is the face of Lionhead, there are a bunch of talented developers that contribute ideas and bring those that he brings to life. This relationship is a two-way street. Molyneux takes the blame for all complaints, whether they were his fault or not, and we'll be honest, his reputation is earned even if it's built less off the games being bad and more on his own gas. Still, games like these don't happen because of the supposed genius mind of one man, but from the collective effort and ingenuity of a full team of talented developers. Anyways, let's get straight into Black and White 2. Coming off of Black and White's success, Peter and co, while proud of their game, were listening to the critics and player feedback, and they looked at two paths, expanding the strategy and godly elements of the game, or going all in on the creature, your godly pet with a mind of its own that could either help or hurt villagers depending on how you teach it. They initially thought of doing an expansion pack on each idea, but decided to cancel the strategy expansion and use all of those ideas on a sequel and keep the creature ideas to an expansion for the original that I covered in another video. With all work on the original game finished with that Creature Isle expansion pack, Peter and the Lionhead Brain Trust went to work on several projects with several studios, with the newly formed satellite studio Black and White Studios being opened in 2002 to focus on, well, you know, how are they going to follow up such an ambitious critical darling? Well, how about with armies and war? This info comes from an interview Peter did with GameSpot, where he answered how he wanted to satisfy both fans of the original game and hardcore RTS fans. They brought in Ron Miller, an industry veteran who had worked at Blizzard previously on games such as Warcraft and Warcraft 2, and Molyneux and Miller would hash out ideas in, quote, complaining sessions that would often go on for hours at a time. Molyneux stated that the concept that ended up being the driving force of the game was, are you a god of war or are you a god of peace? Peter would say that while he was proud of the ambition of Black and White, he knew that the game was flawed, quote, especially the start of the game, the creature learning system, and the micromanagement of your people. With the main concept and major additions addressed for the game, Black and White Studios would grow from a group of 20 in the beginning, ending up with a total development team size of 80. And public details would be few and far between in the early years of development, but they would be just as open as they were with the original game in 2004, doing a lot of press like the aforementioned interview, a full E3 showcase where Peter would do what Peter does and tells the world of every ambitious idea that he thinks is going to make it into the final project. And he would expand on the God of Peace aspect by touting Black and White 2's city building mechanics, which would allow you to gain followers through building more and more impressive cities. He would say things like that citizens would stop and admire trees if you planted it in a nice area, or universities would allow you to expand influence and increase the abilities of your city. While I quote him, taverns on the other hand provide their own function. Because it's a god game, you can really play around with all the structures. You can put people into the tavern, Molyneux explains. In fact, you can put everyone in there and get your whole town drunk if you like. He ended this preview with showing off the new epic miracle, Earthquake, which causes an impressive chasm that breaks open the earth, something that you couldn't dream of even doing in the original. They would continue to be open with another series of development diaries on GameSpy, which, unlike the first games, are mostly still on the site. This provides a lot of rich details on what goes into the development. The difficulties of having to hand animate every little movement one frame at a time, especially for the creature. How they hired actual gamers as not just regular bug testers, but to play the game proper to see if it actually worked at all, and how they wanted to help get those people's foot in the door of the gaming industry. There was a diary on how new sound man, Craig Beatty, had to make 10,000 sounds for the game, as well as compose the soundtrack. And details of the story which, unlike the original, they started development way earlier and had a true emotional core with multiple branching paths. But we'll get on that later. One quote from the diary on Miracles really shows that they had similar issues with the original that I did, and I quote, "As I've mentioned a few times before, in Black and White 1, you never felt like a god. You didn't feel really powerful. You didn't feel really amazing. You just felt like a bit of an errand boy that would cast an odd miracle or two. What drives us now is thoughts like, yes, I am a god. I want to do enormous godlike things. The idea is to think of the best possible miracles and make them come to life." Quote, they intended to rehaul the miracles by having fewer of them, but giving them more utility. The example they used was that you could use fireballs as traps, load up siege equipment with them, and pour magma to better defend your city. Doesn't this sound awesome? Heck, even Peter said that this was as good as a game gets. There's just one problem, and it brings us to our first point as to why this game isn't looked on as fondly as the original, or even as much as its reviews would suggest. Half of the things described here did not make it into the final game. Shocker, I know, but this isn't necessarily a case of Peter having his foot in his mouth like with Fable. This was a systematic issue with the whole rollout of information during development. Much of these development diaries were written over a full year before the game came out, and after they stopped writing them, Lionhead got a huge infusion of cash from 3 different venture capitalist firms: Ingenious Ventures, IDGVE, and Ad Partners, under the guise that going outside of just publisher EA would allow more flexibility. Now, those of us who know how business people work, I would imagine that the limitless creative energies of Molyneux and the clearly passionate team who had great ideas themselves was quickly tightened to get the game out the door due to the money men at both EA and these firms wanting some return on investment immediately. This is the unfortunate truth of every game that ever comes out, especially in this era when better hardware necessitated higher budgets for higher fidelity, even if the game isn't nearly as sprawling and ambitious as Lionhead set out to do. You may be like, Eric, that's cool, but what didn't make it in? And I'm gonna tell you, hold on man, I got you. We know it was received well, so enough of development, let's get into the game itself and its major changes from the original. We already know that the biggest addition is RTS gameplay, but nearly every mechanic of the original has been changed, and in my opinion, mostly for the better. The list of features from Black and White that return unscathed is actually very small. The hand controls return with some minor additions, such as hand forcing, which lets you rub the ground and mess with enemies and complete certain side quests. Managing followers by making them into disciples is the same, just with a few new roles. To perform miracles, you still need worshippers to dance at your worship site, and the structure of the quest with gold scrolls to progress the main story and silver for side quests remains, and finally the morality system remains in place, with evil acts and good acts resulting in an alignment change, though it is improved in its impact on playstyle. For the differences, let's start from city building and work our way back up to the RTS. Instead of the previous system of capturing towns through gaining belief through good or evil acts in their area, you now have 2 options: capturing with an army, which gives you the town and its influence ring, or you can have your city reach a certain level of impressiveness points to have the whole population move to your city with their resources, but you don't gain the influence ring of the city, or the ability to mine their mines, some of which can be bottomless, which is especially useful as the game gets tougher. Speaking of resources, food and wood return, but there's an additional one, ore, which is the most important for city building, as the most impressive buildings require a lot of materials, and every starting city only has 1 mine with a limited amount of it. Luckily, you can increase your yields of each resource through buildings that increase resource gathering efficiency, like granaries for grain, smelters for ore, and lumber mills for wood. There are no more resource miracles, and they've balanced the way villagers collect wood, so deforestation is less of a problem, and trees grow back in a more realistic manner than the original, and food yields are more easily managed due to being able to create larger size fields. Your populations can grow pretty rapidly, so house building and fields become something you really have to stay on top of. And luckily, blueprints and workshops have been removed and replaced with a nifty menu that allows you to pick and place buildings at will without having to devote wood to scaffolds. The town center will even display the most requested building in the center for easy access. Each building you place has a set level of impressiveness, and once you place one, there are diminishing returns on said impressiveness. You can even build buildings for your villagers now by getting the necessary resources and dropping it on the building you desire. It speeds up and allows you to prioritize certain buildings instead of waiting forever for your villagers to get through all of them. Though, this does come with a price, as it requires more resources to build it yourself than it would be for your villagers to do it. Perfectly balanced as all things should be. You can build paths pretty seamlessly and set up grids if you're a true city simulation dork. It's not the most advanced, obviously, but I have seen some beautiful looking cities come from people online that have more patience to fine-tune this stuff than I do. But I wouldn't say mine look too bad either, though. You don't have to be a genius to get a decent looking result, and the city building loop is pretty addicting in my opinion. The UI has been revamped as well, abandoning the minimalist design for a menu system that's a little confusing at first, but you get used to it after a while. The menu features tabs for your creature, building types, and a tribute menu that lets you unlock new buildings, miracles, creatures items such as miracles for your creature, advanced flags, and toys that shape morality. You can also use your tribute to purchase experienced soldiers, men or women if your population gets wonky and unbalanced, as well as little lore books and a couple of abilities for the players, such as a multi-pickup, which allows you to pick up multiple things at once, clever, which is very useful, the gesture system from the first game, and the last hand forcing, which allows you to basically punch things within your influence, which is very useful for defending your city when your walls have broken down. The tribute system is brand new as well. You gain more tribute points by completing main quests, side quests, and these objectives that encourage you to change your playstyle a bit. I like this change due to side quests in the original seeming superfluous and having little in the way of actual useful rewards. The tribute is super helpful and helps give the game a sense of progression and allowing you to fine-tune your playstyle. But points are not given so liberally that you can unlock everything, so you do have to be conscious of that, especially in the later stages. Now, one of the changes that seem to have bummed people out is the lack of any other gods. Your enemies are human tribal leaders instead, but they still have a creature and their own playstyle and pretty much act as a god building their cities and armies anyways. With how bad the god AI was in the first game, I'm not sure it's any worse for wear. Though I do think it appears to be a little less dynamic, as a lot of the AI's decisions throughout every level appears to be scripted rather than done in response to anything you do. On the topic of AI, the creature is back with improved intelligence, they simplified the learning system for it, and you can fine-tune its specific desires now and it'll display them on its head while you're doing it, allowing you to quickly get rid of undesirable behaviors. Enemy creatures appear to be as dynamic, if not more so than the original, in contrast to the leader AI who seems to send the same amount of troops every time. Your creatures can still perform miracles, but instead of spamming to teach, they are purchased in the tribute menu, and higher levels of effectiveness at a certain task can also be bought in the tribute menu through the flag system. The flags replace the leash types. Instead of being based on morality, they are based on tasks like resource gathering, building, war, entertaining villagers, or soldiers to raise morale and happiness, as well as a free will one. Free will is default and is also a meter. The more you make your creature fight on the leash, the lower its free will, and usually the more evil its own morality is. In my opinion, the creature is a lot more useful in this game. In my review for the first game, I said that you could more or less ignore the creature and beat the game, which would be a worse game, but the signature feature should be something you have to use, not just a tool at your disposal. In Black and White 2, you straight up will struggle to defend your city without your creature, let alone build it up and gather resources and keep morale high. Whether you're city building or sending your armies, your creature is invaluable to accomplishing both tasks. The morality system returns, with good being city building and evil being war criminal mass genocide mode. You can use armies without being totally evil though, like I did, and it's a major improvement in my eyes. Both sides of the morality system offer a different gameplay experience that are both valid and have their own challenges to them if you want to go all in on one or the other. Though in my opinion, the creature is most useful for your armies as he can defend your city by himself, especially when you max him out with a full set of miracles and experience flags. Which is especially useful when you're trying to siege an enemy city, as your creature can destroy the wall pretty quickly once he gets strong enough. And once he has a full set of miracles, he can pretty much take out all the enemy armies by himself while your army takes the city. We've already started talking about it, but let's get in the big change. The big kahuna. The new army system. It's tutorialized early and it's pretty simple. Build an armory or an archery, and you can plant a flag and drag to create a platoon of up to 150 men. Armies need resources. Men, food, and ore. So if you go all in on armies, you should be devoting most of your city to fields and cheap housing so your population can grow and you can have plenty of food for the city and its armies. What your armies can do is pretty limited. I liken it to great value total war. You can place archers on walls for defense, you can defend individual buildings, and you can command them to attack buildings. To invade a walled city, you need siege engines, which are just catapults, or you can use your creature to bash walls, as I stated earlier. Once you are inside a city, you have to capture the town center, which is basically a waiting game where your army surrounds the town center and takes on a barrage of attacks. Once you do this, the city is yours to control, as I said previously. Armies have their experience levels, and the more experienced your army is, the more formidable they will be. Inexperienced armies will be slaughtered by the stronger enemies in the later game, so it's important that you get them into battles and capturing towns if you want to go all in on this route. You can even bring in experienced soldiers from previous lands for a hefty price of tribute. And trust me, it's worth it, and they turn the tide of the battle very quickly. I've always loved city battles in Total War games, so watching you place a bunch of archers on a wall and having them shoot defensive soldiers has always been satisfying to me. The RTS elements also make creatures far more useful, as stated previously. I feel like I should have more to say on it, but that's essentially it. But still, the sum of Black and White 2's gameplay loop is greater than its parts. While things like additional siege weapons would add to immersion, I don't necessarily think that a greater emphasis on RTS depth would have actually been the best use of the limited time and resources the developers had, especially considering all the ideas that were publicly pushed out but were dropped. Remember how they said buildings would have more utility? That didn't happen. Taverns don't get your people drunk, they just increase happiness. Universities do not increase the town's abilities, nor is there really any way to do that, it just increases the amount of impressiveness. No, your fireball miracles cannot pour magma or be used by siege equipment to shoot fireballs out of it. It doesn't happen. Miracles are functionally similar, but you can pour them, which allows for more accurate use when defending your city. But no, it's not magma, and no, you can't use them as traps. The miracles at your disposal are fire, heal, lightning, meteor, water, and shield. I didn't use the shield or meteor that often, as the cost of meteor was not often worth its effectiveness, but lightning is so overpowered, you can destroy enemy platoons with one quality throw to the middle of them. It's just so satisfying. Healing is great for keeping your armies and people healthy, and even more useful for your creature so he can heal himself. Not only are there regular miracles, there are epic miracles. To use them, you have to construct the miracle's corresponding wonder, which costs first a lot of tribute, then a lot of resources to construct, and finally a lot of prayer power. But trust me when I say that it's worth it. There are 4 epic miracles: the Siren Miracle, which is the cheapest and only peaceful one, where its use will cause enemy armies hit by its effect to join your side. The Hurricane Miracle, which creates a powerful storm that wrecks armies and cities. And the Earthquake Miracle, as shown off at E3, which creates a giant fissure that destroys everything in its path. And last but certainly not least, the Volcano Miracle, that creates a giant volcano that destroys everything around it while leaving a lot of magma for a pretty decent amount of time. All of these can be used by you, and all of them will be used against you. So we've already established the basic concept of the gameplay. City building, RTS with a little bit of pet simulation thrown in, and all the other finer features of the game. I find the gameplay here to be a lot of fun and, frankly, addicting. Every time I sit down to play it for this video, I ended up going way longer than I initially intended to. The features that were cut here don't seem to be big enough deals to really warrant the disappointing reception from fans over the years. And that brings us to the second reason for the game's reception. People wanted the game to expand on the sandbox god game elements of the original, rather than go a new route. And I can see both sides to this. I actually really think the sandbox elements of the original game provide fewer satisfying ways to go through its campaign, and box you in so much that you never really feel like a god. You feel like an errand boy who can barely do anything miraculous at all. It's either grinding and spamming non-evil miracles to be a good guy, or toast everyone to gain belief faster. Black and White 2, by focusing on city building and RTS elements, actually provides more freedom to complete the main story however you see fit. And I felt more like a god here. I wasn't just being ordered around by villagers, but I was guiding their very existence, how they lived, whether they were pacifists or whether they were warriors. You can summon storms, earthquakes, sirens, and volcanoes, and these grand acts and spectacle make me feel more like a god than the attempt of an alternated gameplay loop in Black and White 1. The line of criticism I totally agree with, though, is that Black and White 2's lack of a skirmish or multiplayer mode is a gargantuan disappointment. This game is ripe for this stuff, and these modes were the best outlets for the sandbox elements of the original anyways. In a skirmish mode, the much improved AI here could provide a lot of challenging gameplay, even if it was just for a couple maps. Multiplayer would be awesome, though I fear that maybe with a human opponent, you would be forced into pure army gameplay, as getting enough of the requisite impressiveness to take towns might be an impossible task. I actually think this point is valid, though. While I think Black and White 2 is worthy of being called a sequel, it is a very different game from the original, and if you were nostalgic for that and wanted more of that specific gameplay style, you just really weren't going to get that here. But what you are going to get here is some technical elements that still hold up today. In my opinion, Black and White 2 looks pretty good, even today. There's a lot of foliage, your conscience is detailed and a little gross looking, frankly. Your creature is far more detailed, and the work these animators had to put in pays off, as the animations are mostly crisp except for a few bugs here and there. Each land has different weather effects, and they look pretty good. Even textures are relatively high quality here for the era, and there's high quality texture packs you can even download today if they don't meet your standards. You can say what you will about Lionhead and their inability to meet all expectations, but the visuals here do not disappoint. I think everything holds up to pretty close scrutiny as well. The buildings look pretty nice, the villagers don't look too bad, especially when you're comparing them to the villagers from Fable, which was only released a few months earlier, and there are far fewer of them. The action doesn't look too bad for the RTS elements, the effects on the miracles look sharp and polished as well. To get the game running on modern systems, all you have to do is install all the initial patches from Lionhead, as well as one fan patch which allows it to run on Windows 10 and 11 pretty seamlessly. The game supports high resolution seamlessly, and the only thing I had to do to prevent any jank was to cap the frame rate at 60 frames per second in my graphics card drivers. This is just due to cutscenes and all the animations of the game being tied to 60 frames per second. So when it runs higher, the cutscenes skip and the animations just look wrong. While the presentation for the most part is pretty good, the presentation for the side quests and the side quests in general is But they did fix the rewards for them. There are few Silver Scroll quests per land, and it feels like one of the few on every land are just throwing barrels to these swagless brothers who don't have anything on our charming missionaries. And let me tell you, the throwing in this game, much like the original, feels pretty horrible. And being as accurate as you need to for these side quests is not fun at all. Other side quests include helping a student pass their martial arts exam, putting out fires, finding statues throughout a land, and none of these are really all that fun and barely have a setup. It really seems like they were rushed out and have very little time put into them, which is a shame. They lack a lot of the charm of the originals too, which I didn't necessarily love being an errand boy instead of a god, but at least there was still some charm here and every quest had a proper setup. Here you're still an errand boy, but without the pomp. Another element that is disappointing for me that doesn't really get brought up in retrospect is the story, and it's disappointing for a completely different reason than the original story. The game begins with basically the same cutscene as the first game, except with a worse voice actor, where they describe how gods are born from pure prayer and yada yada, and you get to decide how you help or hurt people. Obviously very rushed since it's literally the same awesome visual from the first game. And then you get sent to a tutorial land where you pick your creature and learn the most basic controls, and it is very annoying and I skip it immediately. But my little friend is very, very cute. Putting that first cutscene before this is a very confusing choice, but okay. Now the story starts in earnest. You go to your Greek capital city with your advisors who return looking more disheveled than the last game. Those years were rough on our boys. Their voice actors return too, and they still add a lot of the humor and personality of the game. And as you get closer and you see the blood red sky, you realize that something is wrong. And guess what? Your people are under attack from a massive onslaught of Aztecs. And to all the other history nerds, just throw out all of it. It's not worth thinking too much about Aztecs attacking Greeks, just roll with the punches here. Think of it like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the Aztecs are the Fire Nation trying to rule the world. As this attack goes on, you try to save as many people as you can by throwing them into a portal. You get to roll barrels at the Aztec army and light hay on fire to stop an army. Then the Aztec's massive creature summons not one, but 2 volcanoes, and you realize that there's no way you can save any more people, and you gotta just take who did survive and try to rebuild. I will say the music in this scene is so perfectly dramatic for the moment and gorgeous, and generally much of the music in black and white too is really good. The main menu music is also very pretty, though it is truly video game music in that these are not lengthy pieces, as often they're less than a minute and are composed for certain circumstances, like music for armies changing and expanding based on how large it is and of which culture the army comes from. Each culture has its own set of variations, and there's a lot of variations, so you don't find yourself getting annoyed by the soundscapes here. So shout out to Craig Beatty for his efforts. The next land is another tutorial land where you learn the aforementioned city building, resource, and army building mechanics, and learn how to take towns by force or peacefully. It's useful, it's more fun, and the game eases you into all of it. The next land is where the game truly starts, though. This is the Norse land. They have their own creature, and like most of the remaining tribes, they have allied with the Aztecs out of fear and hatred for the Greeks. This is where tribal leaders are introduced to you, and you can barely see them since they're only human after all. But you can hear their thoughts, so no matter the tribe, they'll respond to your actions and taunt you.
If the Aztecs are to rule with Norse help, I must stop these persistent Greeks.
But you now have the freedom to tackle this land however you want without fear of an onslaught, as the Norse only earnestly attack once, and from then on just plant troops outside of your city. Peaceful is easy here, and I just plant archers on my wall for when I need to let the new villagers that I won with respect through my gate. Once you earn the respect of all the cities, the Norse leader admits defeat and admiration and promises to join the fight against the Aztecs.
The Greeks have shown a way other than war. I am inspired by their fairness and their civilization. I shall consider becoming allies with these Greeks. They have culture far beyond that of the Aztecs.
You take a portal to the next land where you search for elite archers that survived the Aztec landing, and you and your followers end up on a land with a Japanese leader. The Japanese tribal leader here expresses admiration for the Greek survival and does not want war with them, but his hands are tied as he is honorable and will respect the truce his brother made with the Aztecs. This Japanese leader is not aggressive and will not attempt a full frontal assault, which is smart because you have a bottleneck near your city, which you can easily guard, and you have a creature advantage as this leader does not. I still choose to go through the impressiveness route as I find the city building to be the most addicting part for me. Though I do start taking the empty villages and creating outposts for more resources as it gets hard to keep up with the large Japanese village. When I did try to send my army closer to their city, they hit me with the Siren Wonder, which converted my troops to their side, which was a major loss. But as my city grew, their people flocked to my lovely city, and this Japanese leader admitted defeat here and went to meet with his brother, who is the true leader of the Japanese. A portal appears, and on to the next land. The brother here is more aggressive and will attack really quickly, so you should build your wall before anything else. In this land, it's just way smarter to go with city building. This leader taunts you incessantly and seems to have far more beef with you than his calmer brother does. If you are to take any outpost villages and go the war route, and it's probably smarter to get a closer one that you overpopulate since the final city is walled off, and you are at an inherent disadvantage sending armies there. This is a reminder to save your game more often, as there is not an autosave feature, and my game crashed right as I won this level. I got the footage, but I had to restart the land, which was very frustrating. The younger brother implores for his brother to recognize that the Greeks have a god and might be the promised tribe from a prophecy that a wounded tribe would rise up with a god and defeat a great evil or whatever. It's really generic and not much goes into it. Now you actually head to the homeland of the Japanese. And this land is tough. The Japanese leader is aggressive with bow troops everywhere, siege equipment stationed near your wall to attack on sight, and walled off cities. Plus, this leader has an earthquake wonder, which will leave a huge gap in your walls that needs to be filled quickly as the Japanese will rush the city once there's an opening. Wood is also limited here, but you have a nice amount of ore to work with, so city building is great here. Just make sure you build your smelter and lumber mill to maximize the limited resources. I capture some outposts and realize I'm wasting my time doing so, and after grinding out buildings I take this land pretty easily, but it takes a few hours and my game crashes again and I have to rinse repeat, do it all the same. God bless you, Lionhead, never change. The Japanese brothers pledge support for you, having had their eyes open that the prophecy is true and that they cannot go against a god. And that's where you go into the first Aztec land, which is an outpost for them. The Aztecs have their slave outpost here, and they are easy to persuade to join you, but lacking in resources due to the lack of fertile land here. Luckily, you get a little bit of water nearby, and you can expand your walls as needed. This is one of the easiest lands, and you can beat it really quickly with just some city building. And once you take everything here, it's on to the final land, which is really where the game is at its best. So here you have a pre-built city, which is nice because you don't have a lot of time to get going before you have all sides of your city quickly under attack from a siege. Lightning does a great job of taking care of those armies quickly so you're not overwhelmed, and once you either successfully or unsuccessfully fight off this invasion, they hit the front of your city with a volcano wonder, which absolutely destroys your wall, fields, and much of your houses. So you either need to restart and prepare ahead of time, or try to save yourself by building the walls yourself really quickly. All may seem lost here, but you get a lifeline as the Norse come to aid your efforts, and you can take the nearby Aztec village by force with their armies and siege equipment, which I do with ease. I send some of the army to my own village to shore up defenses, but once that's captured, I round up all the resources and villagers with that multi-pickup from that city and put them into my own to replenish what was lost from the volcano, since that Aztec village does not have much utility due to a lack of mines. The Aztecs will continue to send their creatures and large experienced armies at your main city, so be sure to shore up your defenses for when you must take your eyes away from the main city. The game then throws you another bone as the other Aztec city has a bottomless mine and your new Japanese friends appear with some armies to help you take that, which I do, and I keep the city as a very powerful outpost and resource mine. I even built a volcano wonder for the coming effort to take the Aztec main walled city, which is huge and has many layers of protective walls. Now, if you're all in on war, now's the time to build huge armies and gather all the ore from the other city. But if you're good, now's the time to keep expanding your main city's walls so you have more room for buildings. The Aztecs will continue to assault and will be a major pain throughout this. My armies were too inexperienced for a full invasion to be feasible against a powerful Aztec army and their many walls, so I concoct a plan with the Volcano Wonder. If I place it just right, I can take out several of their walls at once that even if I don't get enough impressiveness to capture it through city building, I have a clear path to take it by force, and the magma will weaken their population and armies. It's a win-win. It's just consuming to get the volcano wonder to charge all the way up. But my western city is populated and awesome and gets it done. When I unleash the volcano in the ultimate act of revenge, it destroys everything in its path and even reduces the impressiveness of the village so much that their village flocks to me. My strategy to strike fear with my incredible bite worked, and now I accept those who are left with love. The Aztecs are defeated, and their hateful domination is over. And so is the game, and a post-credits scene shows the Aztec leader praying for the Aztec god to return and save him, with the implication that it does, which it will in the expansion that I'll be covering in the next video. As far as post-game content goes, the game just sends you back to the Norseland with all the things you've bought with tribute intact, basically a new game plus. As far as the story goes, it's a pretty by-the-numbers functional story that I think is an improvement over the original in just about every way, except for the fact that they de-emphasize the creature quite a bit. The other major problem is that while doing research for this video, I found the dev diary written by John McClane Foreman about the story, and it is so much better. Like, insanely better. And it's not even like this was super early. It was about a year before release that this article dropped. So they clearly abandoned this pretty late in development. Here's how it goes. The premise is the same with the Aztec enemy and Greek survivors, but now there's political intrigue with the Aztecs driving a wedge between the Greek-Egyptian alliance, which allows the Aztecs to overrun both of them. In the invasion, an acolyte named Demetrios, who is one of the survivors of the initial Aztec assault and is full of guilt after his mentor Euronymous and Minotaur buys him enough time to save him and the rest of the surviving Greeks. Demetrios is unwillingly thrust into the role of high priest and becomes the charismatic face of the new Greek empire. He is guided by your choices as you are his god, and he will lead the Greeks through peace or through revenge, depending on your actions. Each culture would have their own arcs, with some siding with you depending on the path of war and peace you encourage Demetrios to take, and those culture leaders would have their own backstories that would inform these decisions. This sounds awesome. Not only is it a much more personal story, but the branching paths based on alignment would add so much depth to a story that is severely lacking in it. In fact, the depth to the morality system it would add could have been better than Fable if done correctly. This dev diary even features excerpts of dialogue which would imply more scenes and more personality from the enemies than we got in the final game. It's actually a great idea and adds to the feeling of being a god that you have a conflicted acolyte who you can guide down a righteous path or one of all-consuming evil revenge. You could explore themes of gray morality, how followers can be twisted and use their beliefs to justify mass revenge. I don't know, this just bums me out. I love a good story in a game, and this seemed like the perfect story for a god game like Black and White 2. And it's so obvious the story we got was a neutered version of this and that they ran out of time incorporating due to some reason or another, and that's a shame. It makes you wonder how many other good ideas got left on the cutting room floor that they didn't even talk about. I can only theorize that this was cut in the crunch time and was forced by either EA or their new venture capital overlords, but I feel like a super compelling story could have helped the reputation of this game immensely, because if all you're getting is a campaign with an emotional story that gives you a reason to try it again just to see how your actions affect who works with you, who doesn't, is compelling and adds replayability. I like the campaign because it's fun and its tone and atmosphere imply an emotional story, but it's just not there. I got myself worked up, which brings me to my third and final reason for the reputation of this game not being what it really deserves, and it's because Peter Molyneux and the studio's constant yammering about development was crashing the reputation of the studio. If this game was released in a vacuum, devoid of the baggage that comes from being a sequel to a beloved game, in addition to Peter's faltering reputation post the release of Fable, people would call it the great game that it is. But because we got a glimpse of how the game could be better, our brains are only comparing the game to a phantom that doesn't exist, and it's disappointing. If they were just a little more guarded about what they shared, they could have threaded the needle and kept the disappointment at bay. That GameSpot interview with Molyneux had a telling sentence early in its intro. Quote, "Games developed by Peter Molyneux are often characterized by great fanfare, but in more recent times, perhaps with a bit of skepticism." End quote. I am a fan of these games. I like to think that when developers share cool things with their fans, that I can parse my expectations and appreciate the process and artistry of creating games, just like I can with film or movies. But there is something different with games, and people get riled up. Hell, even I just did, thinking about a story that never was. I started this series with the idea that maybe I could clear Molyneux's name a little bit with a bit of, come on guys, acorns aren't a big deal. But I realized that while I disagree that he's a liar who does this to Melita's audience, at least not yet anyways, don't worry, I know what you're thinking, often it's clear that these are just cool ideas. I do compare him to a father who keeps coming home with grand promises that life for them will get better and they'll get rich soon, only for you to be disappointed that he failed to reach those impossibly lofty goals he set. It's not about the games being bad, it's about when you raise expectations. If the results don't reach those expectations, then how can you blame your audience for feeling disappointed? The reputation that Molyneux earned from the last 2 games and a lowered enthusiasm hurt Black and White 2's sales immensely, and it was not nearly the commercial success the original was. And yet, clearly, there was enough success to fund an expansion pack. I like Black and White 2 a lot. Its gameplay is addictive whether you're building lovely cities or having giant battles with your creatures leading the way, but not everyone feels that way. If you played this game back in the day or just love God games and RTSs and want to try something unique, check it out. Maybe you'll think it's great like I did on replay, or you'll side with those who'd view it as a disappointment. What do you think about Black and White 2? Let me know in the comments. Don't think I'm ignoring the expansion pack either. I spun it off into a separate video because there's a fair amount to talk about. So right on cue, next time we'll be taking a look at Black and White 2, The Battle of the Gods. And hell, I'll even preview the game after. The movie studio simulator that almost bankrupted Lionhead, but also was ahead of its time and allowed you to make your own movies in-game and upload them online in the days before YouTube existed. The movies. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Peace.